Welcome, everybody. My name is Natasha Sharkic. I'm CEO of Aita Bioarchaeology. And we started from this year with some free webinars that will happen every second Tuesday of each month. And some of them will be thematic like this one. So because we're in February, the month of St. Valentine's Day, the month of love, this webinar that is dedicated to possibility of exploring archaeology of emotion. So we are recording this, so it will be uploaded within few days, weeks. Who knows, at YouTube. But of course, if you have some questions and you watch this later, you can always contact Aita or directly Nenad. To start with with the presentation, Nenad Andric is a good friend of mine, and also we've been collaborating a lot in many analyses. We did a lot of analysis together. We worked together now already since many years. Also, we've been doing some excavations together. But also like during many times, many nights, so with a beer, we were discussing like, what is that? Like, how can you tell actually that about somebody's emotions through archaeology? So that is going to be a topic of this webinar. Like, are you even able to say what were the emotions in the past of the people in the past, and also were they really different from ours? Were they similar to ours? And what are we getting through this approach in general? So Nenad is now doing his master, so it's still some topic that is in a period of exploration, and it's not that we have to make this very clear. It's not something that is like, okay, we're presenting absolute truths and we have so much publication on this topic. No, it's some very new topic in general, but especially now it's still something that is necessary to explore, to understand better. So the idea of the whole webinar is actually that we discuss about the possibilities of it as something very new and something very interesting, and also to see like what is different, what would be what is different in this approach. How can we can we understand it in the first place? So to start with, I would like to ask you, how did you end up in bioarchaeology in the first place?
Okay. Well, first, thank you very much, Natasha, and thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here and to discuss this with many people, hopefully of similar interests. And as for the bioarchaeology, I was always fascinated with the human body, first and foremost. I remember when I was little, I would ask my parents to buy me the dolls of the anatomical dolls of people, even though it was not cheap. And I wanted to study medicine for a long time. But then I also developed interest for humanities and social theory and realized that I really want to, learn about the social world, present and past. So it was sort of like a logical option for me to do bioarchaeology and like archaeology in general. And I may have watched Bones growing up, as a lot of us have, I suppose. So yeah, it's just a very interesting, field for me. And it has theory, it has praxis, it has excavation, lab work, it has hands-on experience, directly with human remains. So yeah, it's just the thing that captured my interests mostly. Yeah.
Oh, okay, bioarchaeology is already weird enough, and then you're selecting even weirder thing,
Yeah, I gotta push the weirdness.
And how did you come to this topic as a topic of your master?
So, for some years now, I've been very interested in emotions, in general, and also in archaeology. And I realized at some point a few years ago that they were really quite central, to human experience and action. But even like in our lives, they're, a lot of times ignored or neglected or pushed down, And I was wondering like why there was so little interest, it seems at least, if you're not really, into that, really doing it, and little, um, they don't really teach us much about that in universities. I mean, at least I can say, and from what I've heard in archaeology and even social anthropology. And I don't know, I just realized that they are very, very important. I will talk about it a bit more later in the lecture. So I really wanted, to find out more about them and more about archaeology of emotions and see, connect the fields and see what we can find out, about emotions in the past.
And how would you define emotion in the first place?
Emotion. Well, I will also come back to that later, but for now we can say there's it's hard, and a lot of people disagree. But we could say that it's like a reaction to like things that are happening around us and inside us, and a reaction which is you know both like our experience and also what's happening in our body and what we do. And they are very um they have they help us survive basically, you know, they are drive us. They are, very connected to our motivation.
It's one of those things that when you think that everybody knows what is it, but when you try to define it,
Exactly. Yeah, yeah.
it becomes really complicated.
The most basic stuff is like the hardest to, like how would you define time, But
Mm,
like we all know what time is.
yeah, 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 yeah. Okay, I would like to start this, if you agree with, by making differentiation, like explaining what is emotions and making some kind of definition. But also, I would like you, if you can refer to what is the difference between bioarchaeology of care, because that's a also new concept, but is something that we are more or less already familiar with because it's been there for like over a decade. And
hmm
how would you make differentiation between care and emotions?
hmm
But I will let you speak now, and I will just,
Okay.
like I'm here, but I will turn off.
Thank you. Okay, so to start off, we can like talk a bit about bioarchaeology of care. It's maybe described as a formal framework for analyzing cases of giving care to other people in the past in a contextualized and systematic manner. So what it basically means is that we know that like people in the past have been hurt, especially from like um, skeletal evidence, and we know that when we know that they survived, for a while or for a long while after that, we know that they had to have some care given to them, especially for like some injuries or some, other forms of pathologies which they couldn't have survived on their own. So bioarchaeology of care asks like, what can we find out about the care that was given and what it can tell us about the society. So what is done is we try to learn the health status of the individual, the skeletal remains that we have, and we assess their disability. That is, we try to learn how the trauma or some sort of pathology impacted their lives, whether they were able to live by themselves on their own, or they needed some help, and to what extent they needed help, and what that caring for the person would imply. That is, how long they would need care, what would the requirements of that care be, and what would the probable outcomes of the care be. And then when we try to learn all of that from what we have, the material remains, we try to interpret all the information in the light of what we know about that society, that cultural context that we are studying, that the individual belongs to, and what we can learn about that society and culture, that is, of the social relations within the society on a larger scale or a smaller scale, Or we can go into, for example, what we can learn about gender or age in a particular society and culture, what we can learn about the organization, and yeah, identities in general. So it is like when we try to connect the archaeology of emotion and bioarchaeology of care, it is reasonable to assume that emotions existed in the process of care provision. And then we can ask which emotional values in society were probable to play part. So basically, we can't like really find out how people, that were given care and that were providing care really felt like those specific people in specific moments. But we can try to figure out what um, what emotions were probably present and what emotions, or that is to say, emotional values, we will talk about that a bit more later, govern the process of deciding to give care and also giving care. But the point is to become aware of those emotional values as components of the process of providing care. That is, that they must have been a part of it, and to become aware that they're valid research questions, something that we should wonder when we are analyzing that bioarchaeology of care. And not much work has been done so far in the bioarchaeology of care related to emotions. There have been some recent publications which considered it um, and had some, points as to what may be done or could be done in the future, but it's still a very young subdiscipline, well, both of them pretty much, and a lot of work is left to be done. But it's important to consider these questions at all. And for the emotions, there is actually no scientific consensus, like even psychology, as to what they really like actually are. There are different schools of thought about them. We will also get a bit into that later. But to get like a rough picture of like what we are talking about, like how I will use the word emotion in this presentation, it can be understood as a response to stimulus, something that is happening either outside of us or within us. And that response includes physiological changes, what is happening in our body. Are we like, do we have a spike of adrenaline or maybe oxytocin or like, those sorts of changes? And also behavioral reactions, like what will we do about the thing that has changed in the environment or within us? As well as the subjective experience, the feeling that we, in our consciousness, we feel it, and they are usually closely intertwined with thoughts. That is, it still is usually thought that thoughts are, and like rationality in general, is like more important or better than emotions, and first and foremost separate from emotions. But that's not quite the case because emotions and thoughts are sort of like in a dialectic, like they both influence each other and both are influenced by the other. Emotions are partly innate, that's something that we are born with, like how we will react to certain things, and they are partly learned from the culture and society that we live in. They aid with survival. They have adaptive function because they steer us from things that feel bad, that are bad for us, and towards things that are good, although not always. And they are definitely socially and culturally influenced, which means that um, how we will like respond, like which emotion will be evoked in us to certain stimuli, is at least partly learned in the from the people that we live with, grow up with, and even the way that we experience those emotions within us is also culturally influenced. So one more thing that's important, that will be important later in the presentation, is that emotions are commonly viewed as a form of experience, which means that they are subjective and irrational, so to say, or they have been thought to be irrational for a long, long time. So there are two schools of understanding emotions. One of them is biological, which understands them as simply arousal of the body, those physiological reactions. They think that they are identical among all people, all of humanity, and they are present in animals as well, because they are biological functions first and foremost. And the other one is anthropological. So they view emotions as things that are culturally conditioned, as I was explaining just now, and they are developed within cultures, and they are not the same, in all of humanity, in all cultures. They vary, and even the experience, as I've said, and valuation, like, do we consider some emotions good or bad, is different through space and time. That is through different cultures around the planet and in the past. So yeah, the one that will be important to us, that is like mostly accepted within archaeology of emotions, is the anthropological one. But of course, they are not either this or that. Both of them are kind of right, just as long as it's not like too extreme, point of view. So why emotions? As I was saying, they're really central to human experience and action. Um, they are very important in the way that we respond to different situations, and they help navigate the world. And they are deeply intertwined with why we do what we do. So deeply, deeply intertwined with motivation. In psychology, it's like a linked subfield, psychology of motivation and emotions. So, for example, we can take love gestures, which are a behavior that is like out of the ordinary, and it is fueled by the emotion of love, or angry outbursts, or even like soldiers. There's a lot of like trying to make them proud, so they would fight better, for their country. And we can take some other things such as addiction, even like the point is escaping the negative emotions and going towards something that we deem positive. So I was trying to put some, a bit more extreme examples to like really paint the picture, like how central emotions actually are, and how like not that, disconnected from thoughts and rationality. So in archaeology, they have been neglected mostly. They have been deemed, as I said, irrational, which means that they are simply outside of the scope of archaeological research, that is scientific research. Because if something is, not governed by like rational rules, and something that can be, measured and seen, it can simply cannot be, a topic for science. So the timeline, so to say, of the neglect and of like development of archaeology is that first there was focus on description of the material culture that we see and on the material culture in and of itself, and not on society or experience. There was also very little critical reflection. So in that time period, from the 19th through the first half of the 20th century, there just wasn't, like intellectual climate which would, accommodate for such questions as how people in the past felt, or how important were the emotions, or how they varied. And then we had hard science archaeology from the 60s, roughly. But in that, iteration of archaeology, everything must be measurable. So, like with natural science methodologies, we need to measure like how we do today, the chemical, structure of some materials, or some, other forms of analysis, or even, by a ruler to see how long something is. And in general, there was, again, no room for experience. It was mostly directed towards behavior. So there was, again, little room, to ask questions about emotions in the past. But it's still important because emotions are omnipresent. They give force and meaning to pretty much everything that we do, and also to our personal and socio-political relationships. They're the paint, that you put between the lines that you draw. Um, Second, they are already present in our interpretations. Like when we talk about hate toward enemies, or love toward children, or grief toward the dead, they can, especially in like older, the first iteration of archaeology, they can really find their way in their interpretations by being implied or talking about them very uncritically. Like it's a common sense that someone would love their children or grieve their dead. Um, Third, they vary through time. We know that from history as well. They are not the same, at least not fully, uh, as they are today. Uh, and that is actually what the research topic is for the archaeology of emotion, but we will get into that more. The variation through time of emotions. And finally, we have ethical responsibility towards the people from the past because we are representing those people, and we should try to do that as fully as possible, and representing them without considering the emotional values in that culture and society is just not doing just work. So basically, archaeology of emotions is cons sorry. It wants to explicate emotions which are already present and take a critical stance towards them, since they are already present in the people that we study and in our interpretations. And it strives to avoid projecting our own ideas of emotions on the past. I am a bit nervous. Uh, See, emotions. Uh, and so, yeah, what's happening in the late 20th century from the 60s, 70s, humanities, which of course includes archaeology, are changing because they interpret the world, and the world itself is going through rapid changes, such as technological advancements, urbanization, globalization, beginnings of neoliberal capitalism, social inequalities, migration, and increase of the intercultural, to name just, some of them. And when the world is changing that rapidly, so yeah, the emphasis of all that is on difference between people, between cultures, on individuality with the rise of neoliberal capitalism, amongst others, and on fragmentation. How we don't have like one big story or one big people or whatever, but they're many different smaller ones. And then the humanities, which is studying them, is changing its theory as well. So we have emphasis on interpretation, on meanings, on actions of individuals, and on Monday experience. So how it is that people live their lives in the present, their most ordinary lives, and in the past as well. So another thing that is happening in that time is the so-called affective turn, which basically means that humanities, science in general, started realizing that centrality of emotions that we were talking about, started to recognize that the stories, the science that they tell about people in the present or the past simply isn't complete. Our understanding of why people do what they do isn't complete if we don't take into consideration the emotions. And studies of emotions in history and social anthropology started developing, um, and a bit later, archaeology as well. So there have been, of course, objections to studying emotions in archaeology. First is that empathy is methodologically unacceptable, that we simply cannot, try to find out the emotions of the people in the past simply by trying to understand their circumstance and how we would feel, in that situation. Another one is that archaeology of emotion would be too individualistic in the sense that it would stress the personal, the idiosyncratic, like the what one individual feels and does, uh, more than the socio-political, which is the scale of research that we should be striving for, and that it would be simply impossible to learn personal emotional experiences in the past, that it's simply outside of something that we can study and hope to find out, because it's, again, so subjective and irrational. But what can be done in all of that? Um, we can try to focus not on the inner emotional experience, the subjective, but rather on the cultural values and meanings and rules of emotions that are shared among the people. That is, the scale of research should be the society, not what one individual felt in a certain, point in time, but to see how emotions, figured in everything that was going on in the past that we know about it. So we can try to get creative with what questions we ask and where we look for emotions. If we've covered that they are very important, it would be very important to at least, try to look for them earnestly. And some of the questions then would be, since archaeology is, a discipline that studies past through material culture, material life, the first logical question is, how do emotions shape the material life of people? And also, in what types of contexts can emotions be studied? Uh, are there any, specific contexts which are especially favorable to, look for emotions in them? And the discipline, as has been named, is the archaeology of emotion and affect, where affect, again, little consensus, but the rough feel of it is that it's more like it comes before language. It's like what we feel, that level, and then emotion is like what story we weave around that, what we do about it, how we interpret it. Affect is simply, the first feeling that we get. Um, and yeah, as I've said, explication critical stance towards already present emotions is the first line of fighting for archaeology of emotion. And it asks questions how emotions are experienced, understood, and expressed in different sociocultural contexts through time based on material culture. That part is very important because archaeology studies the past, so it's through time, and again based on material culture. So where does archaeology fit in like the humanities when it comes to studying emotions? We can say that philosophy studies the ontology and epistemology of emotions, which means what emotions are, what they consist of, so to say, and how we can come to find them out. And psychology, of course, it gave the main empirical contributions to studying emotions. And then biology studies physiology of emotions and also evolution, how they, played part in evolution and were shaped by evolution of people. Then sociocultural anthropology would study how emotions figure within sociocultural contexts, and archaeology gives the diachronic perspective on emotions. That is the perspective through time. That's the most important part, and also studies relationship between material culture and emotions. So here we have Sarah Tarlow. she's the one who named it the Archaeology of Emotion and Affect. And she did the first PhD, which considered, emotions in archaeology, in that sense, in 1995. So as we can see, it's a very young subdiscipline, and there is still relatively little literature, although in the past 10 years or so, 15, there has been a significant expansion, but still a lot of work remains to be done. And funerary contexts showed to be especially favorable for studying emotions. Maybe it's because it's especially, you see, there's something wrong when you talk about archaeology of, death, dying, burials, funerals, but you don't consider emotions in all of that. Um, and emotions that have been studied the most are grief, pertaining to, again, funerary contexts, and also fear and anxiety. So seems like it would be maybe easier to find some unpleasant emotions better in the past. So what has been done so far? There are certain objects of emotion. Uh, it's it's the objects that are important because, like, emotionally, because of what they mean to us emotionally. So for example, we have wedding rings. They're imbued with, of course, emotional value, emotional significance, and they can be considered as such objects of emotion. But when we look in the past, there's a one very nice example of loom weights in ancient Greek world. It was Lynn Foxell that did that study. We know that they belonged to women. They traveled with women, and they were inherited out the female line. So this is a picture of two loom weights uh, found, sorry, yeah, ancient Greek context. And we know that the society was patrilocal, which means that women, when they married, would move to husband's house with his parents. So these loom weights can be interpreted as materialization of emotional ties to the home that they grew up in and to their mothers, because they brought those loom weights to another settlement. And since they inherited them from their mothers and in the homes that they grew up in, they are interpreted as objects of emotion. And one other thing, another example, is this study by Liv Nielsen Stutz. Uh, she studied three cemeteries around the Baltic Sea. You can see the names, which I will not try to pronounce to prevent butchering. But they're from Denmark, Sweden, and Latvia, and they're from the 7th to 5th millennium, sorry, BC. So they belong to the Mesolithic period. So what's interesting in this study is that it's well researched, those graveyards, a lot of analysis, a lot of, social issues taken into account. But what was missing was considerations of emotions, and this study was from 2015. So Nielsen Stats wanted to consider anxiety in all of that. Uh, so some theoretical framework that she started with was that death can evoke emotions of grief, fear, and anxiety, amongst others. And that funerary ritual can be strongly intertwined with emotional reactions, like emotional reactions which are probable to be very strong in those moments of death, those context situations, are probably gonna dictate what we do about the funeral ritual. And ritual in general is seen as a strategy of reducing anxiety by controlling chaos, because ritual is an action that is ascribed, that is uniform, that is repeated. So it gives a sense of sameness, so to say. So they may be employed in times of anxiety, that is fear of the unknown to try to reduce that negative feeling by trying to control the chaos that is unfolding. So highly structured rituals, which were present at these three graveyards, in times of crisis, such as death, maybe the result of trying to avoid anxiety of the unknown or the uncertain threat of disorder, which is, unfolding in those situations. So she turned to funerary archaeology and archaeothematology, which is basically trying to gather as much information we can from the graves and skeletons to figure out what the funeral ritual was. And she figured out that at all three graveyards, the funeral ritual was very formalized, the same pretty much everywhere. Uh, and she um, learned that there was an importance of not disturbing previous burials in the graveyard. That is for new graves, not to dig into old ones. And it was also important to keep the body whole. So it seemed that a lot of stress was put on getting the ritual right as a response to anxiety, because they probably wanted to make sure that they gave their deceased, a good death, so to say, a good burial, to do the most that they could, to at least, feel better about that. But the interesting to me case here came from Latvia, one of the cemeteries, where new graves actually frequently cut through old ones. There was a lot of burials in the cemetery, and it's interpreted as probably that it was more important to be in that place, in that graveyard, than not to disturb the older dead, so to say. And there was an instance of a grave containing an adult male and female individual, so like a double grave, that cut through an older grave. There was also a large stone in the filling of the grave, which could have maybe been a grave marking. So, people would later know that there was a grave there. And that grave was much deeper than other graves. So how she interpreted that is that it may have been an instance of trying to control anxiety by marking the grave with a large stone found in the filling and making it deeper to prevent disturbing the newly deceased the same way that they, disturbed the previous people. So they were digging the grave, cut through old graves, then made the grave especially deep, if it had not been, an idea to do that before even, um, to really try to reduce the anxiety of, newly deceased being disturbed in the same way that they disturbed the previous ones. So yeah, and what's next for archaeology of emotions? They're first and foremost proving to be an important research question in order to understand ancient peoples. Um, and what is happening right now is shaping the agenda. How we, as archaeologists, try to discover the emotions in the past, uh, and where. So what is needed is theoretical advancements, which are happening, and also methodological experimenting, trying different ways to learn about the emotions in the past and see what works. And I wanted to list some of the important publications. First and foremost, there's Sarah Tarlow, one of the most influential figures in the archaeology of emotions, if not the most. And her two articles, Emotion Archaeology from 2000 and The Archaeology of Emotion and Affect, are definitely among most influential. It's a very good review of what had been done up to that point. And then we have Harris and Sorensen, an article Rethinking Emotion and Material Culture, where they try to develop a pretty sophisticated methodology for studying emotions in the past. And that article came out in an issue of Archaeological Dialogues. And that whole issue was pretty much devoted to archaeology of emotions. So there's that as well. And one of the newer publications from which I presented the Nielsen Stats case study of Fleischer and Norman. They edited the volume The Archaeology of Anxiety, The Materiality of Anxiousness, Worry, and Fear from 2015, a very nice publication. So yeah, here is the literature that I used in this lecture. And thank you very much for your attention. And now, before we jump into questions, we have a few announcements to make. So, Natasha, please.
Yeah, please don't run away. Okay, thank you very much, Nenad. We will open now the question slot, but before that, I would just like to remind you that we have online courses starting from March 15. As you can see, we have big variety of the courses, and I'm really happy about new course that is we will start just like from this. This is going to be the first edition. It's archaeological survey and field methods, which is particularly made for all of you who are not archaeologists, but you're coming from other discipline such as biology or genetics or similar, and you want to get to understand better how archaeology is actually working and to combine the knowledge of human biology with knowledge of the field of archaeology and the methods that we use. And also, another slide, please.
Mhm.
I would also like to announce that we will very soon open the inscriptions for two new practical courses. One is it will take place in San Fiorano. It's a crypt excavation. And the other one is in the first week of August, and another one will take place in Belgrade at the last week of August, just before the beginning of EAA conference. So if you're coming to EAA and also you want to have some more practical knowledge about osteology, this would be a really good opportunity to combine those two things. Thank you very much, Nana. This was really inspiring, and
Thank you very much.
I learned a lot.
I'm glad.
And thank you all for being here. And we see each other next in March, next second Tuesday of the March. We are going to talk about gender archaeology.